Hi, I'm Ryan with Naturally Immersed, and today I want to talk about the EcoFlow Wave 3, just do a quick pros and cons discussion, look at some of the updates, and do a quick comparison of the Wave 3 compared to the previous Wave 2 from last year. Now, I typically do van camping in a pretty basic Ford Transit Connect, but on occasion, I like to do tent camping also, and this was one of those weekends where I took out the tent, took out the Wave 3, and tried to put it to the test in this tent. So we'll see how it went. We'll start by taking a quick look at the new Wave 3 on the right with its darker, more matte finish, and the older Wave 2 with its lighter, more metallic finish. One of the biggest improvements of the Wave 3 has to do with the external battery, now having a dedicated charging port on the battery itself, whereas on the old Wave 2, you could use the extra battery as a standalone battery pack, but you could not charge the battery without plugging a cable into the air conditioning unit itself. So here we have the new plug on the battery of the Wave 3, whereas we lack that plug on the Wave 2. Another improvement has to do with the air ducts. The older Wave 2 has fully plastic ducts, which is very loud when you move them around, and the newer Wave 3 has a metallic inner lining on the ducts, which makes it very quiet and subtle when you're moving them around. Finally, the drainage ports on both devices are similar, but the Wave 3 has a nicer, more aesthetic cover for the plug. At the campsite, I was camping in Bishop, California with high winds and about 80-degree weather outside. So this is a view of the camp from the outside. Looking at the wind itself, we can see that the wind was hovering around 10 to 15 miles an hour, but it was gusting up to 40 miles an hour. And we can see also that the temperature was around 79 to 80 degrees. Now, this is the setup inside the tent where I put the unit fully inside the tent and had the air ducts blowing outside. The temperature in the tent with this wind was initially around 95 degrees, maybe getting up closer to 100. But as the unit ran in the tent itself, the unit did output quite a bit of cool air, but the unit itself also was producing heat, which offset a lot of those improvements in temperature in the ambient space. Now, taking a quick look at the application, we see the temperature in the ambient space, and next we have the temperature that is being output on the air outlet. I do want to stay here for a moment to let you notice on the upper left, the power output in watts is hovering initially around 337 watts, but that can get up to as high as about 580 to 600 watts as the air conditioner is running. Additionally, you can see after just a few minutes that the temperature on the air outlet is dropping pretty quickly, and that will continue to go down, but the ambient temperature is not going to move quite so quickly. So after just 10 minutes of letting the air conditioning unit run, we can see we're at 97 degrees, and continuing on for 20 minutes, we're still at 97 degrees in the ambient space. Now, we'll take a quick deeper dive into the application now, and the application has many improvements. So there's a new design for the application. Much more information is displayed on the initial display, including the pet care mode. But one of my favorite things is we can see in a more detailed state the power coming from the grid or the AC outlet, coming from the DC outlet or solar, and then also coming from the battery. Additionally, if you look at the battery's information, you can also see the current temperature of the battery itself, which I find interesting for a safety perspective because I've seen the battery get as high as 122 degrees over this weekend. You can see all of the different modes for auto mode, which is new, and I like that, where you can set the heating and cooling like a normal air conditioning unit at a house nowadays. And in the settings, we also have charge and discharge limits, which I love. This is similar to a lot of the newer units from EcoFlow, where you can tell the unit how low you'd like the battery to discharge before shutting off, but also how high you would like the battery to charge while the unit is plugged in to help preserve the battery's lifespan in the long run. Here we see some quick more settings, extra settings, but I just wanted to give you a quick look at some of the features that are in the settings, but also point out the most important feature in my mind, which was that charging and discharging limit selector that is now available. I haven't had an opportunity to test the pet care, but I do think that this will have limitations because the ducts of the air conditioning unit need to have ventilation, which means you will need to have a window open with those ducts sticking out if the unit is going to function in any useful manner. And finally, I want to point out that after 20 minutes, we can see the air outlet temperature is down to 65 degrees and the ambient temperature is saying it's 86. However, in reality, it's still around 100 degrees. Now I want to slow down for a minute just to give some final thoughts on this unit and on the previous Wave 2 unit. Now I've used the Wave 2 in my camper van for the last year, and what I've found is that the unit does a fantastic job in the evening of either cooling down the space to a comfortable temperature when sleeping or just relaxing, and also it does a really great job at heating up the space if the unit itself does not become too cold initially. If the temperature is way too hot or if it's way too cold, I've found that this unit simply, the Wave 2 at least, did not produce a sufficient amount of cooling enough to be comfortable really by any means. But also I have had the air conditioning unit get to the point where it was so cold, the unit itself, that when I tried to start the heating feature, it simply couldn't output heat because the unit itself was too cold. So I've realized there are a few limitations to the Wave 2, which I'm hoping some of those limitations will be improved upon in the Wave 3, especially the cooling during summer months. Now, over my first initial test this weekend, I've found that the Wave 3 does have a several degree, maybe 3 to 4 degree lead over the Wave 2 in its cooling capacity, but I'll do further testing and let you know later. Finally, I want to reiterate that I typically use these units inside of the Ford Transit Connect, a camper van. It's really a basic setup on the inside because I need it to be very functional for work and life in addition to camping, but I've been happy with these units so far, or at least the Wave 2 and my initial impression of the Wave 3. But the last final thought I have to give you if you're considering using these units for tent camping is that in the evening, these both will do a fantastic job of cooling down the inner portion of a tent, and they'll do a great job of helping ease the morning heat as the sun comes up in the morning. But what I found in this test was that the Wave 3 during the middle of the day around 3 p.m. was not able to break the heat inside of a tent when not directly having the air blow on you. So outside of the tent, as I showed earlier, the temperature was around 80 degrees, and inside the tent, the temperature was around 100 degrees, and that's with 15-mile-an-hour winds gusting up to about 30 miles an hour outside the tent. The air conditioning unit, though it does a great job in the evening, helps you sleep and keeps you warmer in the winter, it simply cannot keep the heat out if you're trying to use this in a tent. So be aware that it will help you. I think it's worth it, especially for sleeping, but during the day, it's not going to make a world of difference, although it will have some improvement as long as the air is directly blowing on you. So this is my quick initial review of the EcoFlow Wave 3 and the older Wave 2. I hope the information is useful, especially the information regarding middle of the day heat, as I initially expected these units to perform much better in the heat inside of a tent in the middle of the day, but to my dismay, it turns out the units are most well suited for nighttime cooling and heating. Nevertheless, thank you for your view, and if you find this information helpful, please do me a favor, give the video a thumbs up, and if you are interested in more outdoor content, please subscribe.